Hey guys, welcome to another video. Today I'm going to break down how I shot this Koenigsegg Regera, one of my favorite images actually I've taken. We're going to go through the strategies I use, what gear I used, what my lighting was, what lenses, what settings, all that kind of stuff. The idea is I want to break it all down for you guys to learn from and what it takes to get the final shot looking like this. So let's get right into it. Now the first thing I want to talk about is the gear itself. So let's start off with the camera. Now I used my Canon 600D from 12 years ago. Now this is the first camera I ever bought and it's what I started my photography career with. I wasn't even sure what I wanted to do at the time, but I bought it anyway and I started getting into weddings. But ever since then I used it more and more into cars, and then of course till this day I use it. I mean, I don't use it as much now because of course I've got the 5D over here. So this is the main camera that I now use, but for this particular shoot I use a 600D because the images were for social media. So I didn't really want to use a 5D and then end up with massive files. So I saved a bit of space and ended up just shooting on the 600D right here. Alright, let's talk about the lens. Now for this particular shoot I used a 16 by 35mm lens from Canon. You can tell that it's an L lens because of the red ring around the edge. Now the reason I used this lens was because of the space that was available. Usually I would use a 24 to 105 or something with a zoom range, and the reason for that is because it gives me flexibility in terms of the space that I'm in. Now with a 16 to 35, if you are close to the car, it's going to give you a little bit of distortion around the edges. I was actually zoomed all the way out at 16mm for this particular shoot, which is not really the ideal length to be shooting on, but that's what I used based on the space available. Usually what you want to do is go as far back as possible and use the zoom range of the lens so that you get the proportions of the vehicle correct in frame. You don't want kind of distorted edges, etc. But again, it does depend on your environment and it depends on the distance you are from the car when shooting. So bear that in mind. Use a 16mm or a wide angle lens where possible, but ideally you want to use a zoom lens so you are as far back away from the car as possible, and then you are able to zoom in to get the right perspective of the car. Next, let's talk about lighting. Now the lighting that I've always used every time I've done a car shoot, in fact most shoots that I do are using these lights, and those lights are the Profoto B1s. Absolutely love them. Now I don't use the B1 head by itself. Of course you need to have a modifier to get the right kind of image, and the modifiers I've used for cars has mainly been two of them. So one is the 3-foot octa. It gives me a pretty wide spread of light and it's very punchy, so of course it softens the light as well. That's the whole point of using a modifier like that. You don't want any bright spots, especially on a white car like this. It's just going to look horrible and you're going to have to spend a lot of times afterwards trying to fix that. So you want to have a softbox like this to soften the light and reduce your workload later. And the second modifier that I usually use is the 1x4 foot strip box, which is more for sort of like finer detail. So if I'm shooting a wheel or if I'm shooting interior detail, that would be the modifier that I use, just to give it a small strip of light, and then it can sort of darken and fade along the edges, and that gives it a really nice overall final image, which you've seen from my shots many times before. The other thing that is super important in investing in right from the beginning, especially if you're new, is a tripod. Now please guys, if you are new and you are starting to buy various bits of gear, invest in the best tripod you possibly can, and also get a really high quality tripod head as well, because you need both of them to combine together. I use the Manfrotto 55 series. It's a standard version, it's not a carbon fiber version, so it does add a little bit of weight, especially the head itself, but I get a lot of flexibility in making sure that I've angled the shot properly and it's a solid head. The last thing that you want is to have to align every single shot in post-production because each one is slightly misaligned. You don't want that, because every time the shutter triggers, every time you take the shot, you're going to have a slight movement if the tripod is not solid. Of course you want to make sure you've put it on a flat surface as well to make sure that there's minimal movements. So please, if you are buying gear, make sure that the tripod is of the best quality you can possibly get. And the last thing you need to shoot shots like this is remote triggers. Now once the camera has been set on the tripod, you do not want to touch it. The framing, everything has been correctly set. You do not want to touch the camera. You don't even want to trigger the camera by pressing the shutter button on the camera itself, because you're going to cause small movements. So the best way to avoid that is to have a remote trigger. It makes life a hell of a lot easier. you can do it by yourself, and you have minimal misalignments on each image when it comes to post-production. So if you want to see the full list of gear that I used, including various other bits and pieces like polarizing filters, etc., I've left all the details in the description below. Feel free to check those out. All right, let's talk about the pre-shoot, everything you need to do before you start shooting itself. Now, the first thing I usually like to do is to have a quick walk around the car, just to visualize everything, just to explore all the little features that it has, because I want to make sure that I know what I'm shooting. I know which details to capture and spend more time on, which areas need a bit more work, and which areas are going to be painful. So doing a quick walk around the car is always going to be helpful, because you need to make sure you know what you're looking at. And one of the main reasons I do that as well is because this particular car had carbon fiber everywhere, right? It's a Koenigsegg. So you need to understand and know where the flash is going to go to avoid flashes on the carbon fiber, because all you're going to see is just a patch of light and all the carbon fiber detail is going to be removed. So bear that in mind and really observe what you're looking at as you're walking around the car, and make sure that there's no dirty spots anywhere. So if you've got a microfiber cloth with you, which I highly recommend, because then you can remove any fingerprints or any dust like that if there is any of that stuff there. Trust me, that is really annoying, especially when it comes to shooting close-up details. So carry a microfiber cloth with you as well. You won't have to sit there for hours afterwards trying to remove each individual speck of dust later. That's very irritating and it consumes a lot of your time. So back to the actual walk around, I actually did one with this Koenigsegg, which you can see right here. First of all, I'm sorry, but that is probably one of the nicest profiles of any car there is. It's such a slippery coefficient that it's obviously no wonder it can do some ridiculous speeds. But this, ladies and gents, is the Koenigsegg Regera. This is the slightly updated version with the winglets at the back here, obviously helping the aerodynamics. If you look at the profile of this car, well, actually the rear of that is just ridiculously how it's kind of shaped, or coming inwards here to help with the aero. Obviously he's kind of like a Le Mans type style of design there. Coming over to the front, you have Venturi looking fins here, again aiding in aerodynamics. Quite a large opening there for the air to go through, and these LEDs here are actually ridiculous. So you've got the main headlights, and then you've got individual bulbs that kind of light up as well when the headlights are on. I'm going to show you that in a second. Single wiper on the screen there, pretty intense. And then I'll show you this car's party piece. That's the key. Look closely at the key. Every single button has got something that opens. So unlocking the car, this is the charger at the back which opens up. Doors open up with these buttons here, the front opens up and the rear opens up. So check this out. How sick is this? And then you press this, front starts opening all through the remote, and then you press this and the rear starts opening up. All of that is done through the key. That's just ridiculous. It's like a fucking transformer. So the engine is obviously at the back. Quite a lot of space here if you think about it. You got the intake radiator here, feeds in the airbox, that giant thing over there, and then the engine is obviously mounted in front of the rear wheels, making it a ridiculously compact, actually reasonably compact engine. Huge hydraulic strut going across the back wheels there. Formula 1 suspension, well, Formula 1 style suspension. Radiator at the back here. I'm not quite sure what this is for. I think this is the cooling of the exhaust, the gearbox. So if you look here, this giant exhaust isn't an exhaust, it's a fan in there to cool down the radiator. The actual exhaust, if you look through there, is here. These are actually by Akrapovic. So you've got one on each side, quite discreet, but they look amazing. You'll be fooled to think that's the exhaust, but it's not. I'll start it in a second so you can hear what it sounds like, but look at the detail. These gold bolts everywhere. Very, very nice. Carbon fiber everywhere as well. Under the side of the wing is exposed carbon. The top part is painted. quite a thick layer of paint actually. When you touch this, it's quite a thick layer. Let me show you around the inside of the car as well. I mean, this is my hand, yeah? Look at the size of that to this. Huge. Going inside the car. By the way, this car is not easy to get in or out of. Right, this is where things get complicated now, because this car is not easy to start. I'm going to close the door. Close the front actually first. Close the rear. Close that door. Close this door. How sick is that? This is all done through the key. Why did that door not close? Do you not want to close? There we go. Alright, check this out. So the key kind of slots through into this socket over here. It's magnetic, so it just sits there. Everything is controlled on this screen. Now if you look here, even the seating is controlled through here, so you can move it back and forth, tilting forward and backwards for both sides, and including the mirror as well. Where's it gone? Right there. Right, how cool is that? Then you got obviously the heating settings and controls for the media. You got the controls for that. You got the performance, which is for wet, snow, normal, racetrack, traction control on and off, electronic stability on and off, windows, which I'm going to put up because there's noise going on everywhere, and then the digital dash right there is really nice. It's quite dark in here. This roof comes off obviously with these latches. You undo these 3 latches here, and then on the outside you got a couple of latches as well, and then it will come off. So that's quite cool. Anyway, enough talking, let's start this up. Just press it once, comes to life. Foot on the brake. You have to put your foot on the brake hard in this car, because it was like trying to start up the Starship Enterprise. It just wouldn't start. So let's see if it starts this time. So you hold the button down, there you go. Alright, this thing is actually ridiculously loud. There is a handle here to open the door. There we go. Yeah, you pull the handle and the door's open. And then it opens halfway for some reason. There you go. I don't know if you can hear, but this is actually a really loud exhaust. And the message on the screen says, ensure the door is closed. Now there's got like a latch down there, which is like a safety for the electronics, and it keeps on giving you a warning that this car needs to either switch off and switch back on to reset the electronics, kind of like a kill switch. So once the walk around is done, you should be ready to now set up your camera in the location that you've chosen based on what you've seen on the car as you were doing the walk around, and now you should be ready to shoot. Now my camera settings for this camera were as follows, and the reason why they were chosen like this is because I wanted the environment as dark as possible. That's always my base image that I take. So I have full control over the light if the image is completely dark, and depending on the environment that you're in, it may sometimes be hard to do that, especially when you're outdoors. This is one of the advantages of shooting indoors, because then you can either turn off the lights. Now I couldn't do that on this day because there were still people working within the actual workshop itself, so we left the lights on. However, I made the image as dark as possible, and to be honest with you, even if the lights were turned completely off, I would still struggle because we had skylights in the building which would have still bled some light through, so you would have still been able to see some form of reflection on the vehicle. So then I'm now ready to take the light and walk around with the car with my trigger in the other hand as well, and just shoot various areas of the car which I want to expose in the final image. Now you're gonna have to spend a bit of time around certain areas. Like I said earlier, you're gonna have to spend a bit more time around the rims, and you want to do that because you want to get the disc behind it as well, and the calipers. Now of course, with a car that's worth almost $4 million, maybe even more now, you want to capture every single detail. So capturing the rims, the carbon fiber discs, and the calipers behind, and actually showing them in the final shot is going to be a great detail to add. Now that may not be necessary all the time, because if it's for social media, you may not actually even see that unless you really zoom in. However, when it comes to capturing for print and larger format end results, publications, you would be able to see those details. So do it anyway, at least then you have it, and if you don't need to use it later, then it's fine, you don't have to. So once you've done the whole exterior of the car, the interior of the car is going to be as important. Now, there's various ways of doing this. It was a lot easier to do with the Regera because it was a profile shot, both the doors were open, so I could just put the actual flash, just hold it over the windscreen, and that gave me enough exposure to light up the seats, light up the dash, etc., and show the nice red leather seats that you can see in the final shot. Sometimes that's not as easy as it seems. So for example, when I was shooting the Chiron, using the same technique of holding the light on top may not have worked, because that would have maybe blocked the interior itself, because it's obviously such a huge box. So instead, for that particular shot, I removed the actual softbox from in front, and I actually just placed the B1 heads in the footwell on each side of the car and just triggered the flash. And then that just gave me a nice exposure of the seats in the Chiron as well. And then those are what you see in the final composed image. So it all depends on what the car is and what angle you're shooting it from. They spend so much time making these cars and bringing all that detail to the customer. So you do want to show that off, especially on a car that's worth $3, $4, $5, $6 million. So the post-production phase is where it can take a bit of time, but it's where the magic happens. And that's what's going to bring your final image to life. Now, the first thing you want to do is actually bring that initial base image that you took right at the beginning, and you're going to build the image up and expose the car throughout that phase and get rid of bits that you don't need by adding masked layers. Now, each time you bring an image in, make sure that you do the lens correction so it just straightens out your image, and tick the chromatic aberration box also, just to sort of create that base layer. You're going to do that with every single one. That way each image is not deformed and it'll become easier to work with, so you're not going to get any distorted edges, etc., etc. So once all that is done, you're going to layer each image one at a time. You're going to add a mask to each one, and then you're going to brush out the areas that you don't want to keep, and then just add the areas with the brush where the light is hitting the car. And you're going to do that with every single layer, so you should have enough images that light up every single part of the car, and then using the brush you're going to bring the entire car to life, and then you should have a complete image of the car. Now bear in mind that there are going to be areas that may not look okay, and then that's where the post-processing comes in, because once you have layered all the images on top of each other and you have brushed in the lit up areas, even after that you're going to maybe go in and just touch them up, maybe add extra layers where you're going to have to add a white layer or whatever the color of the car is, and just sort of blend it in just to make the entire car as even as possible, because you're going to get dark spots. In some cases you may get dark spots, so that's why it's best to ensure that you get that shot right at the beginning rather than having to do it in post-production, because then that means you're gonna have to spend more time. So just make sure that you try and light up the car properly when you are shooting, because then that just reduces your processing time. Get it all done in shot as much as you can. So when that's completed, you're going to want to create a stamp visible layer so you have one solid piece, and then just put all the sort of negatives, is what I call them, all the original files into one folder, hide it away. Then you're just working with one base image of the actual completed car. Then the next stage is to actually get a pencil, draw all around it. I mean, you can use AI now because we've got generative AI, which I will get onto in a minute, but it may not give you the best result. So I like to do it manually, which is to get the pencil, trace all the way around the car, and then have the actual car itself on its own complete layer. Now, usually before I've even started the shoot, I've got an idea of what kind of final image I want it to look like. So that means I gotta have an image in my head of the background that I wanna have. Now for this one, it's a white car. I wanted to have a sort of studio environment style shoot. We were not in a studio, but the closest thing to a studio I could create was to do it in post. So I removed the car from the background in post, then I'm able to now start creating the background of a studio environment. Of course, you can use the internet, find some inspiration of what you want the final image to look like. But when it comes to creating your background, of course, make it different, make it unique to you, because it's your work you're representing. So I went for this sort of gray studio environment, and then I went for these sort of beamed lights coming in from the top right hand side and then sort of spilling onto the floor underneath the car from the bottom left corner as well. And I think it adds a nice dynamic to the final image. It doesn't just look like it's on a plain gray background. I used a similar sort of effect with the green center images that I shot a while ago, and I think they turned out pretty good. I kind of repeated that with this one, but I matched it to the color of the car so it doesn't look out of place, and then the background sort of blends in nicely with the overall shot. Now, as I mentioned earlier on in the video, you may get areas of the car where the flash has hit carbon fiber, or it's hit this area of the car where it's made it too exposed because of the distance that you're away from the car. All of these things need to be considered while you're shooting. But if you can't avoid them, now you have generative AI I think that's a massive help, and I experienced that with this car in certain areas, but it was so tough to remove originally when I shot these images a few years ago. Now with generative AI, I'm able to obviously just highlight the area that I want fixed. So for example, on the front of the car, while it was open, there was an area where there was a flash on the carbon fiber and I couldn't remove it because it was just very tedious, and trying to get it as perfect as possible, it was very tough to do. So I highlighted the area that I wanted it to repair essentially, and it actually did an extremely good job and it got rid of it. So now the final image is no longer got that little blob of white light from the flash. It just looks really nice. So use generative AI if you need to, but again, keep it as small as possible. Make sure you're doing small areas, because the problem with generative AI at the moment is that it reduces the actual final quality of the image. So if you've got that little patch there and you're about to blow that whole image up to print on a massive canvas or whatever it is, you're going to see that small patch in a slightly lower resolution than the rest of the image. So try and keep the areas of generative AI that you use to an absolute minimum for now. Future updates may bring higher resolution, but for now they are quite low resolution, so you need to also bear that in mind. Again, that's what I said earlier. You need to make sure that you light the car up as cleanly as possible so you don't have these problems in post. So if you're using generative AI, again, keep that in mind, because that's an issue that you may face if you're using these images for print. And then the last thing that you want to do is to create another stamp visible layer once all those elements are completed. And then you want to add a small bit of camera raw, so you can just brighten up the image a little bit, maybe bring up the dark areas, add a bit more color, maybe turn the temperature down so it's a bit more blue, or whatever it is you want. I've done some of those things. And then you want to also bring the creativity level up, so maybe add a bit more texture, maybe make the image a bit more sharper in certain areas as well, because you want the image to be as sharp as possible. But again, that entirely depends on the final use case for your image. So again, mine was for social media, so I wanted to be a bit more sharp, because Instagram sometimes compresses the images and you want to upload them to the highest quality possible. So that is the final shot of the Regera, and that's the process. So it's may seem like a fairly lengthy process, but there's so many elements in there in general when it comes to shooting any kind of car, not even just something of this caliber, but shooting any kind of car. There's so many variables that you may need to think of. It's going to be different for each shoot, but the more control of the lighting and the environment that you have, the easier the shoot is going to be for you. Now, certain times you can't avoid certain problems, and that's fine, but then you got to do the best that you can with the tools and the environment that you're given. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. If you got value out of that, be sure to hit the like button, subscribe if you want to see more videos like this, and let me know in the comments what you liked the best. Let me know if you think that I could have done something better in this shoot. So I love to hear some feedback, so leave your comments below. And if you want to see more content like this where I'm breaking down certain shoots, again, let me know in the comments, and then I will see you in the next video. Take care.